welcome today in Woburn. I'm your host, Samantha Stone, and we have a lot going on in our city this week. There are a lot of teachers are on strike. We're not going to talk about that today. We'll certainly circle back around as those negotiations hopefully come to fruition. I think we should all acknowledge that not a single person in the city of Woburn wants this strike to continue, and that we're all hopeful that everyone will be able to come together and find their way back to students very quickly. And I would just encourage all of us to be kind to each other. I know that there are some parents who are helping other parents and watching kids and juggling and doing all of those things. And there's lots of community resources, including lunches being given out in the school. So if you need something, please lean on us as a community to help you. And we'll all hope and look forward to everybody getting back in the classrooms as soon as is possible. If you haven't seen it, we did do an interview with Barbara Locke a couple of weeks ago. Some things have certainly changed since then, but I thought it was a good, helpful background. So I would encourage you to take a look at that interview if that's something you haven't seen. Today, we're going to talk a lot about housing, which is a really, really important topic for our city. And we're very fortunate that we have City Councilor Darlene with us and Representative Haggerty is with us. And we're going to get into that. We also have kind of a fun segment with Jeff Dillon talking about a new Ecopark and the progress we've made there and some amazing money that is coming to our community for that. So we'll talk about that. Before I jump in, I just want to do something really important so I don't forget. There is a telethon coming up for the Council of Social Concern. This is an incredibly important fundraiser for the community there. This is the food pantry. This is how many families in need reduce food insecurity. It's an amazing, wonderful program. And I originally was going to co-host the telethon this weekend. And unfortunately, I've been called away for work. And because it is something that is done largely in person, we couldn't arrange for a remote thing. So I am asking you now, in a much faster way than I might have co-hosting the telethon itself, to please support this really, really invaluable resource. And there'll be a link here for you to look at how to get that. So with all of that in mind, welcome, Rich.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate you having us in and giving us a chance to talk a little bit about this. And obviously, thanks for your continued work communicating to the community what's happening, and thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because this is something that, you know, in preparation for a discussion, I was going out and looking at some additional information, and I actually learned a lot or got a lot more questions. I'm not sure which as I was doing it. I think most of us don't really have a full sense of what's been happening. So there was some rulings or legislations. You can tell me what the proper wording is around this for the MB. I'm going to look at my notes because I want to get it right. The MBTA communities that addressed a housing shortage that we have across the state of Massachusetts. And that was passed in 2021. And we're now coming to a point where enforcement of those guidelines are starting to be put in place. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. At the time that legislation was passed, I'd love to get your take on if you supported it and if you did, kind of what you were hoping for it to achieve.
Sure. So I guess a couple of things. So this legislation was a giant piece of legislation. Let's start there. This was an economic development bill that included, I think, was $625 million in economic development for programs across the state. And at the time, again, we're backing up over a year now. A lot of this stuff was trying to supplement some of the dollars and expend some of the dollars, in fact, that we had tried to target towards different businesses in our communities, small business grants, grants for restaurants. Both of those were giant parts of this bill. There was student borrower protections in this bill. There were, what else? Additional resources for housing. I think we were upwards over $100 million in new housing dollars to be invested over the course of the next 5 years, including our low-income housing subsidy program that we kind of support developers with to be able to give them the tools they need to be able to create affordable housing in communities. So all of these things were part of the bill, including the MBTA communities legislation that was probably about 2 paragraphs, and on paper it's it's pretty straightforward. Candidly, what happened is DHCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development, they really got their hands on this and, in my opinion, kind of manipulated it beyond what certainly I think I intended and what some others perhaps intended as well, and turned what was less than 2 paragraphs into, 300 pages of regulations and standards, and put requirements, in my opinion, in there that weren't initially in the legislation for communities to create affordable housing. So the original regulations, I think, called for 3,600 units in Woburn to be created, and mostly around Anderson Transportation Center, about a half-mile radius in that area. The new regulations that came out about 9 months later took that 3,500 number down to about 2,600, and put in some other changes. So, but again, multifamily zoning by right at the time wasn't necessarily in my opinion, an offensive thing. We were supporting multifamily housing in and around Anderson Station for years, including many that I had supported, the 40B development on Presidential Way, Cabot and Forbes on the corner of Atlantic and Commerce Way, the Woburn Mall project, the 40R development we did. So we had done all these types of things heading us in that direction anyways. But our biggest challenge, I think, was the fact that those units that we had already done the work on, that Woburn was leading on over the course of the last decade, and that I think a lot of us, including myself, supported, wasn't counted in our total that they were now requesting that we come up with. And that was the biggest disappointment, I think, that we weren't getting credit for that. So, yeah. So
thank you for that. I think that's a really important summary of what it is. And this happens sometimes where we have a good idea, and sometimes in the rollout of that good idea, things get put in there. And one of the things is, I think it was in April, the mayor, along with support from City Council and others, the Housing Authority had sent out saying, here's what we think the rules are going to be. We, along with other communities, said, time out. We are not going to abide by these rules. This is not something that we can support. And that communication went somewhere around April. Since that time, the rules have been maybe finalized, I think was the impression I had, or at least they've been changed. Do you feel like they have changed substantially? And Darlene, I'm going to bring Darlene in this conversation a little bit, but I want to get Rich's perspective, from sort of a state level.
Yes, I mean, they headed in the right direction is the short answer, but probably not far enough, particularly with regards to the getting the credit for the amount of units we've already created. So again, those 3 projects I just mentioned alone were almost 1,000 units. Add on top of that some of the different things that the council has had in front of us in the last 4 years. You're easily approaching 15, 16, 1,700 units. Those should have been counted, and those have not been counted yet. Now, new regs did move us from what was considered a bus community down to a commuter rail community, and that's what decreased the number of units within the zone from, again, about 3,500, I think, now to supposedly 2,600. DHCD's numbers aren't spot on because of the fact of the decision by the city to not comply with the regulations. I think we're one of 8 communities out of 175 that has made the decision at this time not to comply. I support the decision of the city. I want to say that clearly. I support the city council and the mayor in their kind of wait and see approach here to try to figure out what the best steps are moving forward. But again, I think the HCD still has work to do, in my opinion, to make it more fair. I'm not sure they're going to move at this point. Their view is, I think, that their regulations are in place. The final, I think, date is tomorrow to file with them on that. The good news is, I think, and I will say this, is that some of the different grants that non-compliance makes us ineligible for are grants that largely the city hasn't accessed. So of the 3 grants, I don't think we've accessed any of those 3 grants in the last 25 years. So again, not to say that that's necessarily a good thing going forward if we were to get one or try to get one next year, but the reality is, the dollars that were not accessible right now, we haven't utilized those again in over 2.5 decades.
Okay. Well, that's really good because you sort of read my mind. That was going to be one of my questions. I know Waltham has been in the news lately because one of their housing grants was cut by like $300,000 as a result of non-compliance, which is a significant amount of money. So it's good to know that at least at this point, those are not funds that we typically rely on. And is it safe to assume there aren't other consequences of other grants or other funding that could get cut as a result of non-compliance? Is that an accurate statement?
Not at this time. I mean, the non-compliance was in the legislation, those 3 items. There's 3 specific grant programs that were in the legislation. And again, I know that the housing authority issue was a concern to folks. I did speak with Woburn Housing on this. I've actually filed legislation to protect them. I filed last week, but the reality is I think that they're going to be fine regardless. Housing authorities initially were going to be, their operating budgets were going to be impacted. And I think that the Baker administration kind of backed off of that approach during the fourth quarter and more or less said, we're not going to do that any longer. I think that the housing authorities will be okay on this, but I did file legislation to permanently protect them.
Great. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for updating us. Is there anything else in terms of our next steps from your perspective that you want us as a community to be aware of and looking out for?
Well, I think we have to be vigilant on this and try to figure out, whether or not non-compliance is something we're going to go with permanently, or whether this is going to be, again, a step-by-step approach, month by month. And I think it should be reviewed. We want to be creating affordable housing. We want to figure out ways to create affordable housing. We know we have a housing crisis in the state and including in our own city. I mean, there's not a week that goes by that I don't get emails and phone calls. And this is the truth from people in our community who can't find housing, and people who are in really tight spots, many whom have families, who have children who are at our high school and our elementary schools, who are homeless. It's a really, really big issue, I think, and something that has been exacerbated in recent years. We've seen rents double just in the last 10 plus years in our community. I can remember renting in 2007 in our city, and renting a 2-bedroom was probably about $1,200. Today it's about $2,500. So we've seen that get, I think, exacerbated aside from the cost of actual purchasing a home. So we've got to address this, because from a competitiveness standpoint of view, it's a big part of, companies' decisions about where to locate, families' decisions where to locate. We don't want to see people moving into Hampshire just to be able to work remotely on Massachusetts companies. We want to keep people here and continue to grow our state and make sure that we still have a healthy tax base to be able to do all the things we need to do here in our city.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that strikes me is I know that the intention and spirit is being sort of a commuting area where people are coming and they have easy access to the train to go places. And that works. And there, in some of those places, we have grocery and stores, but it doesn't help me get to the movies, and it doesn't help me, get to my doctor's appointment. It doesn't help me go see my kids' school play, because we don't really have a busing infrastructure in the city that if I don't have a car, it's easy to get around Woburn. Is that a factor in any of the ongoing conversations that the state level is having to try and mitigate the challenges of that?
It's a huge piece of it, I think. Transportation is kind of it goes hand in glove with housing, because the reality is that people would be willing to live in, call it, more affordable parts of our state if they had transportation to get to some of the economic centers, like a Woburn, like a Waltham, like a Burlington, and obviously like a Boston, so Cambridge, et cetera. So the more reliable that our transportation system is, or if we were to electrify our commuter rail and it ran every 15 minutes instead of every 50 minutes, people would utilize it. People would take it much more frequently and not be as likely to get in their car and cause the climate issues that come with that, and obviously the congestion issues that come with it. So transportation and solving that part of it is a big piece of, in my opinion, making housing more affordable. So we got to connect more affordable areas of our state with transit so that they can get to our economic centers.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Rich. I appreciate it. Darlene, I want to kind of rope you into this conversation because
I'm sitting here chomping on the bit. Believe me.
I love it. I love it. Let's talk about that. So one of the things that is a concern whenever there's new housing, and what, putting aside the cost of it for just a moment, we'll circle back around that, but thousands of units in a specific 50-acre area, which is sort of what the regulations talk about, right? Has an infrastructure impact in terms of the number of cars and things on the road. And we've been talking a little bit about that. how, tell us a little bit on your perspective overall of, us choosing not to comply, and if we're forced to, what that might mean for us as a community.
So as Rep. Haggerty alluded to, Woburn began addressing the housing crisis before it was even called a crisis, right? Since 2012, Woburn has produced 2,648 units, many which are affordable, that we took steps on our own to make sure they were affordable. Of that number, 1,292 are in Ward 5. There are 1,554 units within that half-mile radius of the MBTA already, as Rep. Haggerty alluded to. So here's where my problems start with the DHCD. Number one, it's comprised of a bunch of board members who have zero accountability to the constituents. And they've essentially written this thing. They've put in, so there was the idea, and then they were left to fill in the blanks, okay? We keep talking about affordability. The very first version of this new proposal from DHCD did not even require an affordable housing component. It wasn't even in the original law. In fact, what is astonishing to me is on their website, they talk about, and this is, and I quote, DHCD oversees funding and resources to help people in Massachusetts live affordably and safely. Yet they rolled this thing out without an affordable component, which is just absolutely appalling. Woburn, from our perspective and from the numbers that have been confirmed by the state, we're at 10.68% of affordable housing and climbing with all of the new development
Darlene, I
that
want to
we've
ask
done.
you a question about this, because this
Yep.
comes up a lot. People are constantly asking this question. There is that 10% is calculated based on a formula around what affordable housing is. But people, that may or may not match people's individual sense of what's affordable to me. So just
That's because the requirement, they can't, the requirement for that, which is again absurd, is 80%. It can't be any less than 80% of somebody's median income. And if you check the median income of people who live in Massachusetts, especially in Woburn, check the median income of people who live in Woburn now, we're hitting 6 figures. You never would have seen that. Never would have seen that 10 years ago, right? So if I could circle back.
Thank you for clarifying that. I just
Yes,
wanted to make sure everybody understands what that's calculated by.
So if I could also just circle back to DHCD. So they revised the regulation. And in the regulations, they suggest that there can be affordable housing component, but it is absolutely not required. And they have the stipulations on how it will work. And then the other thing is we talk about transportation, right? And well, this is great because it's going to be at the MBTA. There's going to be less cars on the road, more convenient. There's not one stipulation anywhere that I can find in this law that says we limit the number of cars you can have at these units. And you can have up to 3 bedrooms, okay? There is no stipulation. You asked again about traffic. There's no mitigation for traffic infrastructure. There is some mitigation for water and sewer for the developer if it's on private property, but nothing for the city if it's public. There's no guarantee that I could find that any community who says, yes, we're going to participate, there's no guarantee that says the MBTA won't pull services from our town. I'd like to see that in the law. If we're going to do this and it's based on the things that they're saying, it should be in writing. We will not lose those services coming through Woburn. What else? Not to go on a tirade, but I
No, first of all, I kind of like feisty Darlene. I think this is awesome, but it's important.
So when I say no mitigation, it's also no mitigation for not just the traffic, potential traffic impacts. There's no mitigation for police, for fire, for school teachers, for DPW, for more inspectional workers that we're going to need to go through these buildings and make sure they're safe. And some people might argue, well, we're going to collect a lot of taxes on the buildings and those will help supplement. When you look at the density of what is being proposed, that won't cover the kinds of things we're going to need to do. So for all the detail that supposedly is in here, there's a lot of detail that's been left out that concerns me. as a resident, as a taxpayer, I know that our representatives did their best on this, and I know that Rep. Haggerty, when he saw the first version, was to use a overused expression, out of his mind, just like I was. He's like, what was this? So I appreciate all he did to make them go back to the drawing board too. But this is concerning at the very least. And as it was pointed out earlier, the threat of not getting any grants, or, I mean, some people call it a threat, some people might call it extortion, but at the end of the day, you don't do this, you won't get that. We never got that for 25 years. So I honestly, I hope that some serious consideration is being given by DHCD and on the harm that they're causing, albeit maybe trying to create something good. But again, I'll express my concerns about a board that creates these kinds of rules without any accountability to anybody who's a taxpayer. I know that the big developers are just chomping at the bit for this. This is a dream for them. This is an absolute dream.
Darlene, let me ask you a question.
I think they're probably, if they put a little bit more time into it, there's probably some benefits to it. But I honestly, the way it's written now, even it's in its revised state, if it came to the city council tomorrow, I would not put my name on it. And I suspect you're going to see similar things in some of those other communities. And it's not because we don't want affordable housing. I agree, there's an affordable housing crisis. And in fact, one of the biggest crises is with our senior community. And if you look at the regulations for DHCD, you are not allowed to put any age restriction component in it. So again, I'm like, who are these people that are writing these rules, and who's in the room? And I know they're taking, comments from the public, but I want to know who's been in the room.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I just
don't think
I
think this is an important topic, and I'm glad to see you feeling strongly, right? This is really important. And I want to just talk about a couple of potential scenarios. So one of the things that we have seen as a community, and we're all still fresh in our mind, is developers got land. We said, you can't use it in this way. They took us to court. We lost, right? And they were allowed
the 40B.
Yes,
40B.
The 40B stuff. And they were allowed to
this thing from DHCD makes 40B look like a cakewalk, because at least with 40B and 40R, it's a negotiation with the city on how to mitigate all of those things I talked about earlier. There's none of that in here. This is, you will do this, and this is how you'll do it, and it will be this dense, and end of story. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
So that's 40B.
The concern is somebody could come in and sort of force our hand on this. A developer could take it to court and do something. The other question I have is, I don't even, the area around where this community is meant to be, I don't know how much available land actually exists. Like, is there land that's up for grabs already that would feed into these communities, or is that a constraint that we have, that we would have to take land from a current purpose to meet this requirement?
I don't think you can take private land based on what I
don't literally mean take, because I know. Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
No, that's actually in the regulations that you can't do that.
Okay.
And I would have to defer to our planning board, Tina Cassidy. If I had to guess, based on I know how big the Commerce Way overlay district is and Presidential Way, I would say yes. Yes, so and I know just from experience, there are plenty of people waiting in the wings for this to be ready to go. And again, I really hope Woburn, the city council, just stands their ground and says, not this way. And I guess the first step in that will be to see how many of the units they actually do count. I know that our planning board director was in the process of filing some additional information, as this thing moves along. So we'll see. We'll see. And again, I appreciate the need for these units. I know we need them. But it just doesn't make sense to me, all the things they say why we need them. Oh, the other thing that's not included in this, you can't insist that the buildings be green unless that's something that, is already something you do. So we're in their presentation, they talk about helping the climate because they're reducing the cars. I don't see how we're reducing the cars if we don't have a restriction on how many cars you can have at the units. I don't see how we're helping the climate if you can't, in the regulations, if you can't insist they build green buildings, right? Am I crazy?
I don't think you sound crazy at all. I think you sound very thoughtful. So I'm going to just ask Rich to sort of weigh back in for a second. It sounds like there's very real concerns. And some of that is about the number of units we're responsible for, but it also sounds like there's some of these other elements that can come into play. What would you recommend we as residents do to help support, the concerns around this? Is there anything that we should be doing right now? We're just kind of watching and monitoring it and being on the lookout for when a call for help comes.
Yeah, well, I think, communicating some of the concerns that Councilor Bruen highlighted to DHCD is important. I think, because again, we'll get a new administration now with Governor Healy, and we're going to see, the new Secretary of Housing. She's broken that out separately from Housing and Economic Development to just a housing secretary. Kind of, again, in my opinion, a good thing, recognizing the importance and the work that really needs to be done to address housing. So I think communicating a lot of those concerns that have been outlined to DHCD through public comment is helpful. And I would encourage all of the public to do that, and I'll continue to do that. So I am going to meet with the new secretary before the end of February and raise many of the concerns that we talked about today that I raised a year ago, that I raised back in November, and I'll continue to. And I think, Councilor Bruin's comment, that we recognize that there's obviously affordable housing challenges, but we also recognize that one size fits all approach to anything doesn't work generally. And this is probably the classic example because, in our case in Woburn, this area of our city and the residents of Ward 5 know it better than anyone. It's the economic engine of our community. Tons and tons of our tax revenue come from this area. So converting that from commercial to residential is a concern because doesn't just mean lower taxes because commercial properties pay a higher rate. It also means, as was pointed out, the additional services that are then required to take care of residents in this part of our city. So we got to find a way to make sure we're thinking about that as well, to make sure we don't shoot the golden goose, if you will, that's been helping us keep our city affordable for our residents, our seniors, our families for so long.
And it is it's a very delicate balance. And Rep. Haggerty, you remember when we did the Commerce Way overlay district? I mean, that's one of the things we talked about for a long time is what a delicate balance it is between having the commercial and having the residential. If you tip the scales one way too much in the other direction, it has implications far more reaching than traffic is important, but the implications are far more reaching than just the traffic. So. And again, I'm sorry, I just, I worry about these things that keep me up at night, and I will be putting all of this information into, as Rep. Haggerty suggested, my fellow councilors and I meet formally next Tuesday. So a letter will certainly go out. And I did want to take a moment to send a thank you to Planning Board Director Tina Cassidy and Inspector Quinn. I also had an opportunity to meet Casey, our new economic developer, for helping me, over the course of the last few weeks as I was doing my research. And it's the people that work in the city, and they're just amazing to me, absolutely amazing. So thank you.
We are very, very lucky about that. And they've played an important role and continue to play an important role in this. So for all of you who are listening, I wanted to raise this issue. It's come up quite a lot, and it's an important thing for many reasons for us. One is around having housing that our residents can be in, but also making sure as new housing is built, we do it in a responsible way. So we've had an opportunity to hear from two really important people in our community who are helping drive that. And we'll continue to stay in touch as things evolve there. I also want to now introduce Jeff Dillon, and we're going to talk about something a little bit more fun and exciting, which is we got money to have some more open space. Welcome, Jeff.
Samantha, thank you for having me here today. And I always want to thank you for all you do for the community out there. I see you at all the different events, volunteering, helping out. And of course, want to thank Woburn Public Media for being out there and getting everything on the air for us, so we all know what's happening in our great city.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And I'm super lucky, you know, now that my kids are older, I have a little bit more time to get out there and do lots of things I've wanted to for many years. So it's awesome to get out there. I think most recently we saw each other at a Friends of Horn Pond event where they were celebrating the new fishing line containers that are around the pond.
In fact, that's going great, and it's going to be a process, but will make a big difference and protect our wildlife, and also keep the great tradition that's been forever down there, that people can go and enjoy the pond and bird watch, fish, walk it. As you and I have said many times, the true crown of Woburn right there, jewel crown of Woburn is Horn Pond and in the library.
We are very lucky. Two things that we have really special in our community. And what we're going to talk about today is a new gem that's about to be, that we've recently gotten funding. I'm really excited about this sort of park area, new open space that we're able to develop. Tell us, I know we had you on a while back where you were doing a lot of community input, but we've made some great progress with funding. So tell us about what's happening and how we're going to spend that money.
Really is extremely exciting that we all have dreams, we all have hopes. We had the plans, we had the development plan being drawn. All we were waiting for was that big chunk of money. And thanks to Congresswoman Clark, thanks to State Rep Haggerty, State Rep Jaculo, and also Mayor Galvin worked very hard at this to make sure that we got $2.9 million, which will cover the bulk of, if not all of this whole plan that we have going there. And it starts right with taking down the old school and leveling that all off, making a nice big grassy area, and just proceeding down below, taking care of the old wetlands that over the years have been filled in, and getting that restored to a true wetland again. And perhaps like 60 years ago, 50 years ago, my good friend Kevin McDonough reminded me that we used to ice skate there, and now it's barely a puddle. So to get that taken care of, which not only maybe we can use it for recreation as well, but for the ecology, for the wildlife, for the people who have problems with water in their basement. As we can tell, perhaps with this winter, we're all going through different climate changes here, and it's important to stay with today's activities to make sure we keep up with it. And that's the whole plan over there, to take down the school and not impact the whole environment down there, to make it something that's going to be an impact on what nature is there. What we want to try to do is enhance the experience for people, walking trails, open up the stream so Miranda's the correct way it did 50 years ago when I used to catch brook trout down there, and in the open field and the boardwalks, and just a place where people can go, take a nice walk, sit on a bench, reflect, and get out into some open space, which is so important today, that we never can have enough open space. So that's where we're going. And again, a lot of people have worked really hard at this, getting the funding, and can't thank them enough, so that we can get this done and move forward. That money now is money that we can use, as well as taking down the school, which we would have had to use city funds for. So I can't stress how appreciative I know I am, and the city should be, to the people that really work so hard to get it to the place where we are now and moving forward.
Well, we're really fortunate about that. And for those folks who might not, just to make sure they know where we're talking about, the old Hurl School off of Bedford Road there. If you didn't take one of the walks around where they were creating community effort, there's a lot more wetlands and open space there than I had any idea. I didn't even really know that existed until I got a chance to take a look at it. So it's a wonderful opportunity. It's wonderful that it isn't coming out of city funds, that we have additional funds to support that. When do you envision the project starting? I assume we need to take down the old school probably as one of the first things.
Yep, great question. It's already started. Plans and development well underway. We're going to have a couple of public meetings, which I will now maybe tell you it's a good time to go into it. February 15th, 7 to 8 p.m., March 9th, 6 to 7 p.m. And those will be Zoom meetings, and you can go to the Recreation Department website and it will state how to get on there. And again, if anyone has any trouble or needs any information, they can feel free to contact me. I'm hoping now that we have funding that we can really get going on this really quick. I'd like to see us get going this summer and see what we can get done and start with taking this school down, and let's get rolling here. So that's what I'm hoping. The big problem, funding.
I love that, Jeff. Let's get it done. We got the money. Let's spend it, right? I'm a big fan of that. Now, I know that there's, we've talked in the past about the Plimpton School. People will ask, right? Because this is a different project. This was funded because of the environmental wetlands. It was easier for us to secure some funds for that. But do we have an update with the fire department almost ready to open? Do we have a sense of when that project might also be addressed?
Galvin has talked and said what will happen as soon as the new fire station opens, we'll get the Plimpton School down and host a number of meetings with the neighbors, which we've already had a couple. And so far from the feedback I'm getting, they'd like just a simple grass park with some sitting benches, and again, just a place to have some green space, some place to go to reflect and enjoy nature. But I'm hoping, and I will work on the benefit of the neighbors there to see that happens at the same time. When the fire station opens, let's get going and let's get that one. So as you can see, Ward 3 is busy.
Ward 3 is busy, and I'm so grateful for your advocacy and for helping bring all those people together. You know, securing funding like that isn't easy, and it takes a long time, and we've actually moved pretty remarkably fast. So thank you for your efforts in supporting that team of people who did that. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. I'm so excited to have, I'm actually a little spoiled because I can pretty easily walk to both of those spots. So looking forward to getting a chance to enjoy that open space in the coming year, maybe next year, we'll be hopefully enjoying it.
Well, as I say, if anyone has any questions, I'm pretty much the easiest guy to get a hold of. Give me a call, 781-460-3298. That's my cell phone. Be glad to help regarding either site. And again, Ward 3's coming along quickly with two big exciting projects here, and can't wait to get going. And always appreciate your help, Samantha, and all the community events that you attend, not only as your TV show, but just as a regular community member in the city. And you do a great job. And again, I say Woburn Public Media, that they get the word out, and appreciate all they do.
Yeah, we have an incredible community. I'm really grateful to be a part of it. Thank you, Jeff.
So much. Have a nice day.
Woburn, as always, we've talked about some important topics here, some more fun than others, but all things that matter to our community. As always, please continue to take good care of each other.